The worst thing that could have happened to the UK was joining the EU, a statement that echoed through the streets in 2016 ahead of the referendum that would change everything. It was also a statement that's been reiterated by scholars, academics, and students now that the United Kingdom has officially exited the European Union. We can't blame the 51% majority who sealed the deal in June 2016. How could they have known that leaving the EU would lead to a brain drain, more aptly, the great Brexit brain drain, where the biggest and brightest minds in Britain are packing up and leaving a post-Brexit nation? But wasn't Brexit meant to do anything and everything except cause detriment to the United Kingdom? How and where did it all go wrong?
Independent, democratic, proud, self-governing state that makes its own laws, that controls its own borders, that chooses its friends around the world, and I want us.
Several years after the 2016 referendum that would decide the fate of the United Kingdom's membership in the European Union, Britons are starting to question everything they believed to be true back then. Vote Leave, a political campaign that championed EU withdrawal, was backed by members of every major political organisation. Gisela Stewart, Ian Davidson, and Frank Field were a few from the Labour Party. Michael Gove, Lord Lawson, and of course Boris Johnson made up the Conservative front. And then Vote Leave was also backed by the United Kingdom Independence Party. Vote Leave was a movement that challenged every major political force in the country. They had it all: powerful backing, funding, and a message that the ordinary Briton could relate to. And, truth be told, the ordinary Briton was fed up. It's important to remember here that several world leaders had rallied together to convince Britons to vote to remain in 2016. This included the then President of the United States, Barack Obama, claiming that the notion that the US would be now more eager to form a free trade agreement with the UK was based on, well, nothing. President Obama claimed that it would be in the UK's best interest, economically speaking, as it pertained to trade with the US, to remain as part of the EU. Then again, later President Donald J. Trump claimed that Britons were making the right move by launching the Vote Leave campaign.
The European Union is possibly as bad as China, just smaller, okay? It's terrible what they do to us.
It'll come as a surprise to no one that President Trump has never been staunchly in support of the European Union. But he wouldn't be the only one. Britons were losing faith in the Union. As the largest political, social, and economic union of Europe, the European Union prided itself with the fact that all major European nations were either a part of the Union or wanted to be. The European Union was preceded by the European Economic Community, which was established by the Treaty of Rome in 1957. The EEC aimed to create a common market amongst its founding members: Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany. The EEC later evolved into the European Community in 1993, which became a pillar of the newly formed European Union under the Maastricht Treaty. The UK had been there from the near beginning. The nation joined the EEC on January 1, 1973, alongside Denmark and Ireland. The UK had previously applied to join the EEC in 1961 and 1967, but both applications were vetoed by the French President Charles de Gaulle, who doubted Britain's commitment to European integration. After de Gaulle left office in 1969, negotiations resumed, leading to the UK's successful accession in 1973. The UK remained a member as the EEC evolved into the European Community and later the European Union in 1993, until 2016, of course. The decision to leave the EU wasn't taken in a day. If anything, anti-EU sentiment had been piling on for the longest time, with several Britons routinely shifting between yes, the EU is beneficial for the UK versus no, the EU is doing the UK a disservice. It'd be overly simplistic and, frankly, somewhat delusional to suggest that the only reason why Britons voted to leave the EU was because they'd been brainwashed by anti-EU media propaganda. While it's true that Vote Leave came under fire for suggesting some unrealistic changes that would come to Britain following its exit from the Union, the campaign largely reiterated what Britons had been feeling for a long time. Anti-EU sentiments in the UK had been building for decades, fueled by a mix of political, economical, and cultural grievances. Many Britons saw the EU as an overreaching bureaucracy that undermined national sovereignty. The idea that UK laws were increasingly influenced by unelected EU officials in Brussels led to frustration, particularly among those who valued parliamentary control. This sentiment was exacerbated by EU regulations that some businesses and industries found burdensome, reinforcing the belief that the UK was being held back by excessive red tape. The proverbial red tape in this case is referencing an unnecessary challenge. In this case, it also implied that the red tape was being placed in the UK's path by the EU. We'll discuss whether that was true or not in a moment. You don't get to become the majority over nothing. Over 51% of the voters from the 2016 referendum voted Leave. Were all of them puppets of propaganda? The reasons piled on one by one, and next came immigration. Under the EU's fundamental laws, all member nations reserved the right to freely travel between member nations. This meant that people who wanted to move to the UK to find better work opportunities could do so with no trouble. Vice versa for the UK as well. However, many in the nation believed that free movement was only great in theory. In reality, Western Europe saw a huge influx of migrants coming in from Eastern Europe. In the United Kingdom particularly, Polish migrants migrated in huge numbers. To put these numbers into context, let's take a look at this graph prepared by the Migration Observatory. Taking data from the 2011 to 2021 census alongside the annual population survey, this graph indicates foreign-born populations residing in the United Kingdom from 2004 to 2021. Some things are evident from this graph. 1. Free movement did lead to an increase in net migration from EU member nations. 2. That positive trend only continued until the referendum came to effect in 2020. 3. Arguably, most importantly, immigration as a whole has not declined in the United Kingdom years after Brexit came into effect. This proves the inevitable truth. Migration wasn't exclusively an issue Britons could pin on the EU, although it did contribute towards it. Brexit left about 3.6 million EU citizens in the UK and more than 1 million Britons in the 27 EU nations scrambling to preserve their residency and employment status. The British government claimed that more than 3 million Europeans completed a registration process confirming their right to remain in the UK. If not immigration, there are still more reasons why Britons were unhappy with the Union. They didn't appreciate the looming threat the EU posed. What threat? You might have realised that of the EU nations, the UK enjoyed certain distinctions. This included the very obvious fact that the UK had not adopted the euro as their official currency, maintaining the British pound. Other member nations, however, had slowly began EU integration. On a larger scale, that was exactly what terrified Britons, coming under complete control of the Union and losing their identity in the process. To suggest that the EU wanted to dismantle British culture and its principles would be a reach. Then again, to suggest that the EU didn't, and still doesn't, want member nations to adopt EU fundamental laws and principles wouldn't be an overreach either. At this point, we've established a few things. Britain had their reasons to vote Leave in 2016. However, while their reasons were valid and seemed pressing enough at the time, they had far-reaching impacts. Vote Leave suggested that those far-reaching effects weren't to worry about. Indeed, when the pound devalued after the referendum, the campaign called it a temporary setback. The pound eventually regained footing, giving the campaign more legitimacy. All would be well in the end, and that's what everyone who voted Leave believed. But all was not well after all. Is the United Kingdom experiencing a brain drain? What even is a brain drain? The term refers to academics, scholars and students or otherwise professionals in any capacity leaving a place. Simply, the brain is being drained from a region. This term usually applies to third world nations where, dissatisfied with the quality of life and economic prospects, these scholars leave the nation to pursue better opportunities elsewhere. Not exactly something you'd expect to happen in the United Kingdom. But a 2022 UK-German study shows just that. To put the gravity of the situation into context, the Oxford-Berlin study suggests that the exodus is comparable to those caused by major social or economic crises. The analysis of official statistics by the Oxford and Berlin Research Partnership and the Berlin-based WZB Social Science Centre found that migration from the United Kingdom to other EU countries rose by 30% from about 57,000 a year in 2008 to 2015 to more than 73,000 a year in 2016 to 2018. Spain saw the largest number of UK arrivals, followed by France. Further research found that migration among the 27 countries that now remain in the European Union remained relatively stable during the same period. The number of Britons seeking passports from EU nations also soared by more than 500%. In Germany, it was up 2,000%. But what exactly is causing the brain drain? How did evoking Article 50 push academics out of the country? We're still missing another aspect here: how academics are not entering the nation either. More on that later, but for now, let's talk a little about how voting to leave the EU led to an academic shortfall in the United Kingdom. For one, Brexit highlighted uncertainty. Many in the UK believed till the very end that the majority would vote Remain and things would continue as they always had. Or at least to some degree. It's worth remembering that when David Cameron called for the referendum, he was strongly in support of staying in the EU. He believed that the referendum would prove to be a bargaining chip of sorts, showcasing the UK's growing anti-EU sentiments, causing the Union to renegotiate some of its terms with the EU. We now know that Cameron was overly ambitious, and so was the Remain group that believed this was nothing more than an overzealous movement and it would eventually die down. When it didn't die down as they hoped, that's when they began to scramble. You have to remember that free movement wasn't detrimental in its essence. Yes, it did lead to an increase in net migration in the UK, but it also allowed UK citizens to travel to EU 27 nations to pursue better scholarly opportunities elsewhere. Doesn't that count as a brain drain too? Not necessarily. UK academics who could travel freely between one nation and the next to pursue better academic opportunities would come back because they could just as easily as they did when they left. Moreover, many Britons would complete their internships or pursue semesters abroad in EU 27 nations. It worked for everyone. Free movement wasn't a unilateral movement of migrants who abused the UK's benefits systems. According to a 2022 article by The Guardian, there were growing concerns among senior scientists about the UK's declining scientific standing due to post-Brexit disputes with the EU. The failure to finalise agreements, particularly regarding the Horizon Europe research funding programme, left UK researchers in limbo. Scientists who were initially awarded grants have seen them revoked, jeopardising critical projects including medical research on diseases like malaria. On that note, actually, the UK eventually managed to rejoin the Horizon Europe research funding programme, although many argued that the years it had been spent in limbo were detrimental to the scientific community within the nation. Following Brexit, the UK participation in the Horizon Europe research funding programme was thrown into uncertainty due to political disputes with the EU, particularly over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Initially, the UK had agreed in 2020 to associate with Horizon Europe, committing to a £15 billion contribution over 7 years. However, due to ongoing tensions, the EU blocked the UK from fully joining the programme, leaving UK researchers unable to access new grants. This led to significant disruptions. UK-based scientists who had been awarded grants suddenly had them revoked, and many research collaborations with European partners were left in limbo. Scientists warned of a potential brain drain as young researchers sought more stable opportunities elsewhere. In response, the UK government launched a temporary funding guarantee to cover successful Horizon applicants who could not receive EU funding. However, this was seen as an inadequate substitute for full membership, as Horizon Europe not only provides funding but also offers prestigious networking and collaboration opportunities that cannot easily be replaced. After prolonged negotiations, a breakthrough was finally reached in September 2023, when the UK and EU agreed on a deal allowing Britain to formally rejoin Horizon Europe from January 2024. This was exactly what UK academics were afraid of. The lack of clarity has raised concerns about Britain's reputation as a reliable scientific partner, making future international collaborations more difficult. British science has long thrived on EU funding and partnerships, and the suspension of this support now threatens projects in medicine, physics, archaeology, law, and the humanities. Would you ever relinquish your UK passport? As of 2025, the United Kingdom's passport is ranked 6th globally per the Henley Passport Index. That being said, did you know that there's been a surge in Irish citizenship applications since Brexit, reaching its peak in 2024? Many Britons sought Irish passports to retain the benefits of EU citizenship, such as free movement, work, and residency rights across the EU 27 nations. In 2024, the Foreign Births Register, which grants Irish citizenship to those with Irish-born grandparents, saw a 15% increase. This rise reflects concerns over the UK's economic outlook, tax policies, and post-Brexit travel restrictions. By securing an Irish passport, individuals can regain EU citizenship benefits, making it easier to work, study, and collaborate across the EU. For those without Irish heritage, obtaining EU citizenship is more challenging. Options like long-term residency, marriage, or investment-based golden visa schemes require financial commitments or legal eligibility. UK passport holders without EU citizenship now face greater hurdles in securing academic positions or participating in research collaborations. Visa requirements, work permits, and the upcoming ETIAS travel authorization system add new bureaucratic layers, complicating travel to EU countries. These restrictions have hindered UK-based researchers, limiting access to internal funding and joint projects. While the UK government has explored new educational and cultural exchanges with the EU, uncertainties remain. The long-term impact of Brexit on UK academia continues to unfold, with mobility and collaboration remaining key challenges. All in all, was the brain drain worth leaving the European Union?